We drew attention to another anti-Russian attack by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk. This time, he decided to mark himself with a statement that he timed to coincide with the first anniversary of the events in Yelenovka, where Ukrainian servicemen who were in the pre-trial detention center were killed as a result of a Ukrainian missile strike. We would like to reiterate our appeal to the High Commissioner to uphold the principles of objectivity and impartiality, on which his work and the mandate entrusted to him must be based. This UN official should not assume the role of some global attorney general and give his own assessments of the actions of sovereign states without any evidence and without any understanding of what the evidence base is. Volker Turk's assertion that the death of more than 50 Ukrainian prisoners of war in the pre-trial detention center in Yelenovka was not caused by a hit by a rocket fired from a HIMARS multiple launch rocket system is puzzling. A logical question arises: where does the directorate headed by him, which does not have the appropriate competence in such a specific area, get such conviction? Did someone give him documents? We would like to get acquainted with the person who handed over such documents, and with these documents themselves. The High Commissioner's references to some testimonies of the victims and their relatives do not stand up to scrutiny at all. Since no investigative actions and examinations were carried out by the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, then, in principle, there is nothing to talk about. In fact, we have another empty revelation from the highly likely category. Do you remember how we even gave a degree of gradation of this term? This is one of those grades. I think it's number 8. At the same time, Volker Turk ignores the official information of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation and the investigative committee of our country, which we have repeatedly brought to the general public. We regret that the High Commissioner has again demonstrated double standards and unwillingness to give an objective assessment of the actions of the Kiev regime. On July 31st, at the initiative of Russia, a meeting of the UN Security Council was held on the issue of the systematic use of terrorist methods by Ukraine. The speakers at the event were Deputy Head of the UN Counterterrorism Office Rafi Grigoryan and civil activist Sergei Cholin, who was injured in a terrorist attack against military correspondent Vladlen Tatarsky in April this year. The Russian representative in the UN Security Council, relying on specific examples, described in detail the terrorist nature of the Kiev regime, pointing out the responsibility for such actions of its Western allies. In addition, the role of the UN Secretariat and other international structures was noted, which, by their refusal to respond to the increasingly egregious actions of the Kiev regime, contributed to its slide into terrorism. In turn, Western states predictably tried to shift the focus of the discussion to some kind of Russian aggression. At the same time, a number of the most zealous supporters of the Kiev regime agreed to directly justify the use of terrorist methods by it. I have already quoted the U.S. State Department when a representative of this department said that terrorists can choose their targets themselves. But he does not call the Kiev regime terrorists, but he simply says the Kiev regime. But the methods are terrorist, respectively, and the regime is also the same. Against this background, it is not surprising that, feeling their absolute impunity, the military political leadership of Ukraine is not afraid to admit to committing more and more attacks against civilians and non-military civilian infrastructure. Russia will continue to draw the attention of the international community, in particular, within the framework of the UN Security Council and other specialized bodies of this structure, to the grave humanitarian consequences of the terrorist activities of the Kiev regime. I will add more to this situation. On July 27th, it became known about the decision of U.S. President Biden to begin transferring to the International Criminal Court some evidence that Washington has of evidence of alleged crimes of the Russian military in Ukraine. Thus, the international community is witnessing a fundamental change in the approaches of Americans to interaction with the hate judicial bureaucracy. I would like to remind you of the history of this issue. Indeed, it is very interesting. The fact is that for many years the United States of America, having withdrawn its signature under the Rome Statute, ignored the International Criminal Court. They not only refused any interaction with this structure, but also interfered with its investigations and even imposed personal sanctions against its prosecutors. Washington was openly afraid that as a result of the investigations of this court, facts unpleasant for the United States might be revealed, and the international community would learn about the real crimes committed by NATO troops in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other parts of the world where NATO was marked by its military interventions and bloody crimes. The current U.S. administration seems to be convinced that by creating a negative background around Russia and its leadership through pocket international structures, the U.S. will be able to make the whole world forget about its own numerous war crimes. By the way, an interesting fact, this alleged thaw in relations between Washington and the International Criminal Court coincided with the beginning of the mandate of the new chief prosecutor of the court. He is British. He is a British subject named Karim Ahmed Khan. One of his first decisions was to reduce the priority in the investigation of American crimes in Afghanistan. As a matter of fact, this is the answer. The special relationship between London and Washington is no secret. All the principles of this special relationship between Britain and the United States are observed. Karim Ahmed Khan avoided U.S. sanctions. The decision of the American authorities again tells us that Washington does not bother to observe at least external propriety. Nobody talks about domestic American laws. Nobody talks about international law. We are talking about at least some attempt at acting. Try not so openly, not so brazenly to declare your own country, the United States of America, as a violator of all possible norms. Nothing like this. They act brazenly, boorishly, openly. It will continue to be so unless they are told that this is not the way to do it. Our attitude to the activities of the International Criminal Court, including in the context of Ukraine, is well known. The total degradation of this body is a direct consequence of its readiness to indulge Western sponsors, ignoring both the norms of international law and the interests of conflict resolution. And, of course, I cannot ignore the recent, July 19, speech by the head of British Foreign Intelligence, Richard Moore. This is MI6. At the British Embassy in Prague, it seems to me that such an attack of Russophobia has not happened for a long time. He tried to publicly give an analysis of the situation in Ukraine. As the head of London's covert operations abroad, he again talked about some kind of Russian aggression and the need to continue to provide all possible assistance to Ukraine. At the same time, he did not particularly refuse the involvement of the special services of his country, that is, Britain, in the terrorist attacks that were committed against Russia, especially on the Kerch Bridge. He noted that Ukraine has the right to self-defense, and the West should help it in this. Apparently, he cared little about the fact that we are talking about civilian infrastructure. We also drew attention to the words of Richard Moore, which indicate the intention of London to drive a wedge in Russia's relations with African countries, as well as with Iran and China. As the Russia-Africa summit held in St. Petersburg showed, such provocative attempts by the British have no chance of success. But, of course, they do not want to leave this business, having completely forgotten elementary concepts. I would not talk about honor and decency at all, but, forgetting even the gentleman's code, Richard Moore urged the Russians to betray the motherland and cooperate with British intelligence. I want to say that this is an interesting idea. I believe that we need to respond in a mirror way, and, perhaps, we should make such appeals to British subjects and citizens of other countries of the NATO axis of evil, suggesting that, as Richard Moore said, they cooperate with Russian intelligence. How do you think? It seems to me that it is a great idea to offer British citizens, many of whom are in extremely low circumstances, to work with Russian intelligence. Why not? What is wrong with this? After all, from the point of view of London, this is the norm. True. I see no reason why we should deny ourselves this. For us, the hostile anti-Russian course of London has long been obvious. This is not news. Now the arrogance and impudence of the head of the British spy agency cross all conceivable boundaries. By and large, in general, he hid himself. You know, they used to look smarter somehow. All this is very similar to Goebbels' propaganda methods. Such Russophobia is simply of a nationalist nature. All these their tricks. Do you remember that the Nazis during the World War II offered the citizens of the Soviet Union and Britain to cooperate with them? They said that the motherland does not love them, but the West loves them very much. The West immediately begins to love our citizens when it fails to blitzkrieg. After a failed blitzkrieg, they always go to Plan B and offer to cooperate because they love us very much. I'll say it again. There are things that we do not profess, but there are actions that we can respond to in a mirror way. So wait. And do not shout later that we are interfering in the internal affairs of Britain. Nothing like this. This will simply be our mirror answer.